What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a P.O. Box, and Locals, Patreon. And all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to provide great conversations. And thank you all for your continued support. I have to share the story. Steve says right before I'm usually you do an hour-long interview. And the last time, a couple of weeks ago, me and Dave, it was close to 2 hours. And I said, well, that's the Collum effect. That's what happens when you get on a show with Dave. You can't, an hour is just not possible.
I did 3.5 with Chris Martinson the other day.
So that does that imply that they're twice as good as other podcasts?
No.
I don't know.
No, they're diluted.
Anyway, I thought the 2 hour one was pretty good, but today I have a little bit of a hard stop in roughly an hour.
And I have another one at 1 o'clock, so.
Yeah, at any rate, you got, you get stars, takes up. They're fully booked, Mike.
Well, let's get right into Venezuela, and I don't know who wants to start with thoughts over the weekend of what occurred and where it goes from here. So who wants to go first?
I don't know what happened. I really don't understand it at all. I mean, I know what they told me, but I think they're all liars. So I need Steve to start because he might know what actually happened.
Well, let's just start with the simplest thing, which isn't actually so simple, but relative to everything else that's going to happen. There was a military operation. It was long in planning. We obviously knew something was in the works. We got a big chunk of the U.S. fleet down in the Caribbean. All those countries threatening the United States. You got to protect yourself. So at any rate, it was planned, and it was executed very well because it was an inside job. Clearly,
how many people hit the shore? How many boots were on the ground?
I don't know the final count. It wasn't very many, and there was no resistance, no counterattack, anything like that. So they paid off everybody they had to pay off, and it ran very smoothly and was executed perfectly. There were no U.S. casualties, injuries, broken bones, anything like that. So it was clearly an inside job.
And let me ask you this: is it possible that Maduro saw the writing on the wall and said, "Okay, come and get me"? And because it's not like Gaddafi or Hussein were treated well after being an ex-dictator is not a healthy career path.
Well, he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, Maduro, but I can't believe he would have negotiated something like that.
It's that or die, though, potentially.
Well, I think, at least according to the news reports, and I have no inside information, obviously, I think they offered him other deals that he didn't take, and so so this is what they did. But let us. So the military thing is one thing we know about that. It's fairly transparent, and it's obvious that it was indeed an inside job. The thing is that's interesting to me from an economic point of view is that you've had Hugo Chavez in 1999 came into power. Actually, 3 years after I stopped being Rafael Caldera's chief economic advisor, who was the president of Venezuela. So I was Caldera's advisor in 1995 to 96. There were a lot of problems then, and and why did Caldera bring me in? To fix the thing. So things were deteriorating, particularly with regard to the exchange rate, inflation problems, and many other economic problems, structural problems in the economy. Then you have Chavez come in 1999. He introduces Chavismo, which is a form of socialism, interventionism, statism, however you want to label it. And the economy started to dive down. Then 13 years ago, Chavez realized that he was going to die and handed the reins over to Maduro. And Maduro has stayed in power and kept the Chavismo, that ideology, and things going down, down, down. Now, what do we have? I measure the inflation rate every day in Caracas in Venezuela, and it's the world's highest right now. It's 923% per year.
What's your input to get the inflation rate daily? What's your input?
Okay, so I have a model, and I've written a whole series of peer-reviewed journal articles on this, and it's based on purchasing power parity. And if I know the change in the exchange rate, I can, using a purchasing power parity model that I've developed, estimate very accurately the inflation rates if the inflation is over about 25% per year.
So you don't have to get ground street level inflation data. You just need
data. I don't get it, and we've run all kinds of tests on this, and at inflation rates over 25%, it's very accurate, and at very high rates like 923%, it is extremely accurate. So I can use high frequency data, Dave, and reliable data, the black market exchange rate, and make the calculation. And the only inputs you need are the exchange rate and the rate of inflation in both the two currencies involved, which would be the Bolivar and the US dollar. So that's it. That's that part of the story today. But going back in April of 2018, there was actually a hyperinflation episode in Venezuela in which the monthly inflation rate reached 234%. Then there was another episode in April of 2020, 2 years later, in which the monthly rate went to 151% per month. So what's the inflation story is huge, and Maduro has stayed in the saddle. He's actually been the president for 13 years. There were two episodes of hyperinflation, which there aren't very many. I mean, there have only been 71 hyperinflations in world history, and he's been in the saddle for two of them. And we have the current rate that I just gave you, that's the world's highest, 923% per year. Also, the GDP per capita since the great financial crisis of 2008 has actually collapsed it's lost 63% of its value just since 2008. So here you have a completely imploding economy, very high rates of inflation, and Maduro is still there. So you have to ask the question, well, he was still there until a weekend. He was still there. And why? And that's because of U.S. sanctions. Sanctions create all kinds of unintended consequences. They rarely work, and they didn't work in this case, by the way. They didn't force a regime change. Sanctions didn't. They kept him in power because of what's called a rally around the flag effect. Right. It actually keeps the target in power, the sanctions do. That's the history of sanctions. Now, you can ramp those up to a blockade, and we have a partial blockade, and blockades tend to be more effective than sanctions. But that's the background on what's happened. So the blockade went in That didn't bring down the regime, by the way. That didn't work to bring down the regime. They had to go in and nab the guy. And they did that very cleverly by paying off the relevant military and security apparatus that was protecting the regime. But the key here is the regime didn't change. The Chavismo folks are still in the saddle. And so that's what we'll have to wait and see.
So, some background information. Did Maduro use wily, violent techniques to stay in power, or was it more? I mean, some of those South American dictators can really go bananas, right?
It was a police state. One of my close friends and someone who is a leader in the opposition. It was 3 years in the embassy of Chile. And why was he there for 3 years, not going out? Because the secret police, he received a telephone call from his mother, and he said, the secret police just came to the house, and they're looking for you. And he went straight to the Chilean embassy and stayed there for 3 years.
So again, there's still big degrees of violence. So there's that, but I like think of someone like Julian Assange, who stayed in an embassy, and I wouldn't call us a violent police state, but I would say that there's times we act like a police state on certain people. Were there a lot of fatalities during Maduro's term? Was it like 1 million people got slaughtered or anything like that? Because that can be the case.
Well, Dave, we did have 8 million or so Venezuelans vote with their feet and leave the country.
Well, there's that.
There's that aspect. There are a number of, shall we say, disappeared. But
I see.
But there also are a number of known opposition folks in jail.
Okay.
So it's definitely associated with Chavismo. It is the police state aspect of things.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out there's police state, and then there's killing fields. I'm trying to distinguish those two.
I wouldn't want to be in the crosshairs of either one.
Well, that I agree too.
So I would say there's a little bit of both, but weighting it less killing fields and more the other side.
Police state, more just strong arm tactics.
Yeah, right.
This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffee and a mic.
To get you to not do what they want you to not do.
Yeah, if you cross the regime, you're in serious trouble.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Right.
You're not going to get a speeding ticket and
right.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. And did he? So were there actual elections that were illegitimate elections, or did he get elected somehow authentically?
Yeah. Well, he got himself elected. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And that's pretty widely agreed to. The last election was really a very rigged affair.
Now, I years ago wrote about Smartmatic voting machines, and my understanding of Smartmatic was that we created them to rig elections in Venezuela. Do I have that wrong?
My memory's a little bit fuzzy on that, but that rings a bell.
Okay, because I keep hearing people talk about justifying us going down there because of Smartmatic, and I go, but those were our machines. Those were the same machines that got Biden elected, in my opinion. So, so I'm trying to get my brain on, because I just can't keep up with all these countries at this point.
Let me. I think we have to get into the history of what's going on.
Right. Right.
And what this is, forget all of the nonsense. It's a regime change operation.
Right.
That's the idea. Now, as I said, they did get Maduro. They nabbed him in Caracas and took him to New York. So he's the titular head of this illegitimate regime is gone, but the regime is still there. The Chavismo regime is still there. And the vice president, who's assumed the presidency, she is more of an ideologue and embracing Chavismo and socialism much more than Maduro. And so that's what's going to be interesting, because now the regime that's the residual regime that remains is very hardcore. It's probably more hardcore than it was when Maduro was there.
So the people in the United States dancing in the streets over this wondrous new future for Venezuela then are completely, utterly wrong.
Well, maybe as of today, yes, nothing has changed. They probably have a harder core regime than they had last week, but maybe that will change, because
right.
if the sitting regime doesn't do what Trump tells them to do, he's pretty much told them he's either going to blow them away if he can't buy off the security apparatus and tell them to stand down, then he'll take them out, or he will do what he did with Maduro. He'll pay off the security apparatus, which in South America is fairly easy to do, and right. and then the current sitting president will end up in New York. So let's talk a little bit. Let's set the table around regime changes, and if we set it, we can then get into Venezuela a little bit. And regime changes, we've since World War II, we've had more or less 100 of these things, and they rarely work. There are three types. One is an offensive regime change, where it's a military operation, military versus military, and most of those are covert, by the way. Mm-hmm. There have been a few that have been overt, only two actually. So that's one option, an offensive military thing. The second option is what they call a preventative operation, and that's where you think that there's some alliance, military alliance or foe that's forming, and you take them out to prevent the forming of and strengthening of the military or military alliance. The third thing is the thing that categorizes that Venezuela falls into this category, and that would be the hegemonic operation, and we've had a number of those. Almost all of them are covert. All these regime change things, almost all of them are covert, like Venezuela. Now, let's get into Latin America and Venezuela, because the Monroe Doctrine comes in here, and there's a big debate about whether this was legal or not. And in American law, it's precedent that dictates the answer to that. And the precedent is, it makes it clear this was, from American legal point of view, completely legal. There will never be any cases taken in the United States that the Supreme Court hears about what went on in Venezuela. That is different, by the way, than international law. International law is obvious that it's illegal, but
it means the guys with Trump derangement syndrome will not be able to do anything.
Well, it simply means what all great powers do. When they want to ignore international law, they ignore it, and when they want to accept it, they do. So we have what's called anomie from the Greek, and anomie is there's a law, but it's ignored. So you have a lawless situation. So we have two different things. We have U.S. domestic law. This is clearly constitutional. It's clearly legal, and I'll get into that in just a minute. And you have international law, and under international law, it's clearly illegal. So, but international law doesn't really mean much to the great powers, even some minor powers like Israel. The international law really doesn't mean it much. They do whatever they want to and ignore.
I've noticed that detail. Okay.
So yeah, that is an important footnote, Dave.
Yeah, it is an important footnote, isn't it?
Now let's get into the U.S. law and the precedent. 1823, President Monroe established what in effect is what we call the Monroe Doctrine. And the idea at that point was to keep the European colonialists out of Latin America. So it was very precise and restricted. Then in 1904, we had the Roosevelt Corollary was added to the Monroe Doctrine. And the Roosevelt Corollary, of course, that was a Rough Rider, Teddy Roosevelt. And basically, if you read what Roosevelt said, we own Latin America. End of the story. I mean, Latin America is a vassal state. All the sovereigns in Latin America are really vassal states of the United States. That is what the Roosevelt Corollary laid out. And so that was 1904. So to give you some history of the precedent, people talk about, well, what about Grenada and Panama? Those are recent things where we took action, military action in the United States. But let's go back to the Rough Rider and what this thing was all about. From 1904 to 1930, there were actually 600 cases in which the American Navy went into ports in Latin America. This is where the term gunboat diplomacy arose. 600 times from 1904 to 1930, we went into these ports, and what did we do? We said, either you do what we want you to do, or we're going to blow your head off. So that was part of the picture, but that is only a little part. Most Americans don't know their history very well, obviously, and they haven't checked on AI. Hasn't gotten them up to speed on these things. We invaded between 1904 and 1930 the following countries: Cuba, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Haiti. We annexed Puerto Rico, and we stole a chunk of Colombia and created what's called Panama and built the Panama Canal. So you see, the precedent is just so massive that the idea that people are whining on Congress about, oh, this is not legal, this isn't constitutional, it's a joke.
Right. Do you remember the first overthrow? Do you remember our first overthrow? I got this from Stephen Kinzer. The Queen of Hawaii. We knocked off the Queen of Hawaii in a bloodless coup. So the Dole brothers could grow pineapple.
Well, there's a lot of pineapple and bananas and things like that involved, sugar and
right. United Fruit.
Well, and that, by the way, that is related to Venezuela, because Venezuela, it's in situ resources are a key part of these military operations, and the old ones were blatant. I mean, the U.S. military was doing the work for the corporations that were involved and had interest in banana, sugar, and oil, whatever the natural resource happened to be. And the U.S. taxpayer was paying for this, not the corporations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the background that everyone forgets conveniently.
Let me channel the left as a right winger who's also developed left wing tendencies. In terms of, I'm not a big interventionist abroad. I kind of like the idea that Trump's pulling back and accepting the multipolar world. People make the argument, for example, that Venezuela commandeered the U.S. based oil system that we set up there. And my counter argument would be ExxonMobil and these guys are big boys. They did the math and they blew it. And that's their problem. Now, the counter argument to that would be ExxonMobil are big boys. They knew that our gunboats would go in and blow them away. And so they did the math correctly. So I can go either way. But when people say, well, it's just not fair that they took ExxonMobil's assets, I go, well, you build assets in a godforsaken place. Don't be shocked when someone snags them.
Happens all the time.
Happens all the time, right? Like in the Arab world.
Exactly. So what it means, the calculus, by the way, and I actually have done quite a bit of work on this. The calculus for the companies, it's fairly straightforward arithmetic, figuring out the probabilities. But what you try to do is figure out the probability that you'll have some of your property or maybe all of your property taken away from you in the future. And so that means that the future barrels of oil or whatever it is that if you're mining, that you're bringing out of the ground and bringing to market are going to be worth less than would be
right.
the case if you had 100% probability of secure property rights. So you just figure the present value of the reserves, the in situ reserves that you're buying in the first place, and adjust accordingly. And
so you just do the math and say we better get our money back in X years.
Yeah, right. Now that gets into a very important point that I can raise that I've dealt quite a bit with in Venezuela, and that is the depletion rate. And this comes into this picture that we're talking about, the calculus of the probability of the barrel of oil that you think you own, you're ending up not owning it. It's going to be worth zero. And as a result, of course, the present value that you'd be willing to pay for those reserves should be less than would be the case if you thought you were going to get the barrel.
It's like a junk bond.
Yeah, right. So exactly. So let's look at the depletion rate for the reserves. The reserves are the biggest in the world. They're bigger than Saudi Arabia. Forget about the quality of the oil and all of that. This aggregate reserves are larger than those in Saudi Arabia. They're the largest in the world in Venezuela. The depletion rate is 0.1% per year.
But that's because they're not producing much now, right? It's because they've blown the system so badly.
About 1 million barrels a day. They were producing about 3 million.
Right.
And PDVSA has deteriorated. It hasn't been under Chavissimo. Number one, all the engineers who were competent are gone, and hacks are in there. So they have all kinds of breakdowns and problems just operating. They don't reinvest, so the capital stock is low quality, and the breakdowns are just enormous. So they produce a third of what they were producing, and the depletion rate, as I say, is 0.1% per year. Now, what that means is that it will take a little over 400 years for them, if they're operating like they're operating right now, to actually use the reserves half of the reserves.
The known reserves, right?
The
known reserves.
The known reserves, it will take more than 400 years to reach the midpoint of the exhaustion of the proven reserves. Now, what does that mean? Given any kind of positive discount rate, it means that the reserves aren't worth anything.
Right.
If you're waiting that long to get a barrel of oil out of there,
right.
The reserves are worthless. So the idea, people say, well, we have the rich reserves, the huge reserves, and so forth. The fact is, in economic terms, if they're being exploited in the manner in which they're being exploited now, the reserves aren't worth anything. And to put the thing into context, let's take a major like Exxon. What's Exxon's depletion rate? It's 8%, which is pretty typical, by the way. And that means that in less than 10 years, Exxon will exploit half of the reserves that they have. So they have a positive, at any interest rate, they have a positive, the reserves have a positive value. And of course, that's why Exxon paid something for the reserves or expended the money to explore and develop the reserves that they found. So that's the state of the oil industry. It is in shambles in Venezuela. And where does almost all the oil go? About 85% of it goes to China anyway.
But since China's going to use oil anyway, it seems to me the argument that oil is fungible and therefore if Venezuela produces more, somehow it's a positive no matter what direction it heads because China then won't be consuming, I don't know, Russian oil. I don't know. I'm just arbitrarily throwing that out. Arab oil.
Yeah, I think that my take on the Chinese, and it's a little tricky to speculate what they'll do. I think now, given the way the puzzle is being put together, the Chinese they don't really care about the oil per se. They use it to pay back the Chinese, the Venezuelans, for the loans the Chinese have made in yuan to Venezuela. So as long as China now has one big interest in Venezuela. Pay me back what I loaned you, and I'll probably walk. That's more or less my hunch on where China is in the current picture. But as I say, it's tricky. There are lots of variables in there. I might be wrong, but I think the first order condition is they want to get paid back because they can get 800,000 barrels of oil is easy for them to get, and China from other sources. That's not a problem.
It's just their money. Let me ask you this. You were dismissive of the quality of the oil, but my understanding is the quality of the oil is bad. Is that correct?
It's very heavy, but there are some refineries, particularly in the United States, that need that oil.
So bad oil can be dealt with by correct refineries, yes, no problem.
That's right. The only thing, the refineries have to be set up so that they can extract a lot of the metals, and you know very well the chemistry of that.
I'm told.
Yeah. So there's a lot of junk in the heavy oil that has to be extracted during the refining process, and of course these things can be recycled. Like where does vanadium come from? Well, a lot of it comes from a catalyst. Used catalysts are filled with stuff, and you recycle the catalyst, and you get all kinds of goodies like vanadium.
Right. So if Venezuela was not a failed state in perpetuity, you would likely then see refineries built in Venezuela.
Yes, and you would, and one thing that we haven't really touched on precisely. And one thing that Mrs. Hanke and I found when we started residing in Caracas in the mid-1990s, and we found this across the spectrum, the distribution we were talking about, the distribution of the population from high to very wealthy people. Bolivar is very important. Simon Bolivar is very important in Venezuela. And Bolivarism, it kind of, Chavismo is kind of a takeoff on that. So running Venezuela, you're running a country where Bolivar and Bolivarism and that kind of nationalism, by the way, is embedded. I mean, it's like genetic.
Right.
So you're dealing with a different genetic entity.
Sort of in the population genetic mode, right? Yes.
So I think this idea of running Venezuela it's certainly a kettle of soup I wouldn't want to be cooking.
Right. The other questions come to mind. Quickie, before we get out of time, I want to ask you, you read about platinum. What was your opinion?
I agree with you. It's going up.
Okay. Right. So you couldn't see any potholes in the argument?
No.
It's an unbelievable bullish argument if it's correct.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Okay.
Can we go back to Venezuela here for a second? And Steve, I want to ask.
Who are you? Wait a minute. Who are you? What are you doing?
Still here. I want to ask, since Maduro is the only one removed, the regime is still intact. So, for all intents and purposes, nothing has changed.
Well, nothing has changed, but nominally, but the threat, the big stick, is bigger than it was because
an attitude adjustment.
Yeah, there's a, you know, if somebody knocks off your president,
I gotta send you one of those, Steve. That's my coffee mug.
Yeah, well, I didn't know. So Dave is into the advertising game. Jesus.
So he gave me a mug when he came and visited me in the Adirondacks.
You know, I knew you'd been to Madison Avenue, Dave, but I didn't realize.
Yeah, I'm just an influencer looking for clicks at this point.
Yeah, well. So at any rate,
Candace Owens, I'm coming for your territory.
To make a long story short, I think the situation has changed. Nominally, it hasn't. And as I said before, I think actually nominally, it's probably more hardcore than it was from an ideological point of view, from the Chavismo point of view, from the Bolivarism point of view. All of that is there's more rally around the flag kind of effect. But in addition, on the other side of it, that's one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is you're doing a double take. You think this new president, Rodriguez, isn't looking over his shoulder?
Yeah. It's sort of, it's like when Reagan was first in office, the things he did at some level were symbolic. But I remember like Gaddafi was lipping off to him and he sent the jets over and he blew up his palace and he killed his son. And Gaddafi shut the hell up.
Right. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think the interesting part to me is that the military operation was carried off with perfection. It's unambiguous. The whole operation was brilliant and successful. But that's a simple part of the thing. As complicated as it was and to pull off and so forth is one thing. But the next chapter, running Venezuela, is going to be a lot harder and more complicated. And my sense is that the U.S. has very little idea about Venezuela. The knowledge that they have is very limited. You can even see Trump went after the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize this year, as you know, is someone from Venezuela, and Trump was nominally more or less on her side. She leads the opposition, but he trashed her. He said in public that she is incompetent and unpopular in Venezuela. That's not true.
Do you remember what her counterattack was? Do you remember her counterattack? Her counterattack, she said, was something about if she ends up in a position of power, she would set up an embassy in Jerusalem. And I think it's her way of saying, I'm going after AIPAC, dude.
Yeah. So at any rate, we don't have to get out on the weeds on that, Dave. But,
I know. I'm just baiting you. I'm just seeing if I can get you to bite on it.
But the point is, she's actually very popular.
Okay.
And so this is what this comes back to Austrian economics and the great Austrian economics. My mentor and family friend, Friedrich von Hayek, who wrote about the fatal conceit, and man's fatal conceit is that he is able to shape the world around him according to his own wishes, and that is the problem. Trump is he's Mr. Fatal Conceit.
Yeah,
big time. And this doesn't work. You can't do it. The planners can't plan how things are going to run and how things are going to be shaped as they think they should be. Now, the trouble with Trump, too, not only the fatal conceit, which many people have, most leaders, by the way, are imbued with a fatal conceit, but most have an idea of what they want to see down the pike, and I'm not certain that the Trump administration actually knows what it wants to see in Venezuela.
What's also true about presidents is it takes decades to understand what they did. Right? It takes a long time to understand the consequences of their regime. Right? It takes a while. Trump's this term, Trump is not going to see the fruits of his own labor.
No.
The other thing I just caught my attention, the rise of the awareness of Austrian economics. I'm not sure there's any being put into play, but I had dinner once with the CEO of Morgan Stanley Bank in 2009, and I mentioned the Austrians, and he did not know what I was talking about. And so the awareness, I think, is picked up. I think a lot of people picked up on, Austrian economics to me is impenetrable at some level, but the Austrian business cycle theory is incredibly trivial. Bigger the boom, bigger the bust is basically it.
Well, most of my library behind me here actually is
Austrian.
It's pretty much all Austrian. So,
but you were paddling upstream for a long time.
Well, I would still argue that I still am.
Right.
Now,
I would.
By the way, this was an interesting historical thing too. Before the Great Depression and during the Great Depression, Austrian economics was big. Businessmen in the United States knew all about Austrian economics. And they knew who von Mises was. They knew what the Austrian school was. There was a lot of talk about it. Remember Henry Hazlitt, the great journalist, and I would argue actually was pretty much an economist, was total Austrian and very influential. And business CEOs knew what Austrian economics was all about. Free market economics, free trade, all of that. Non-interventionism. the regime change stuff, by the way, Mises analyzed all this regime change thing perfectly in his works. And the prediction was a priori, Mises said they're never going to work. And ex post facto, if you look at the empirical information that's been gathered by John Mersheimer and some of his PhD students, yeah, that's sure enough. Empirically, they never work.
Is that what Mersheimer actually studies? I knew he was way out over his skis on regime changes and some hot topics. I didn't know what he actually studied as a scholar.
Yeah, well,
I knew about his 2005 paper that got he and Walt in trouble. I'm trying to think. But
I stepped away from the camera for just a minute. Lindsay O'Rourke is one of Mersheimer's PhD students.
Oh, okay.
So this
I didn't know that.
This is the best scholarly treatment of all of this is O'Rourke's book, and it's a realist. It's in the political science lingo, Mersheimer is a realist, and O'Rourke is a realist. So it's coming from the thing from that point of view. And by the way, this is going to be.
There's a lighter version of that book by Stephen Kinzer, I think, called Overthrow.
Yeah, Kinzer's work's good too. Kinzer's
okay.
It comes to the same conclusion.
Exactly.
I'm glad you're seated. The copyright on this is 2018. The publisher is Cornell University Press.
All right. Go Big Red.
Here, see that? Cornell.
That's good. I had a copy editor who used to be a copy editor, Covert Regime Change. I'm copying this book down. Who worked for Cornell University Press, and I used to use her to copy edit all my grant proposals and papers.
Steve, I want to ask you another question, because you rally around the flag. You've said a couple of times now, I think. So if they can go in there and build these refineries, the whole rally around the flag, how are the people going to respond to this? Foreigners coming in and taking the oil.
Depends on really how it's done,
Right.
I would say, if I'm in Maracaibo and I'm unemployed, and all of a sudden Chevron comes in there. I mean, Chevron is there, but if they come in big time, and Exxon comes back and so forth, and I get a job, what do you think I'm going to feel? I'm going to feel damn happy. I got a wallet that's full of money, and
depends if we treat them fairly, I guess. Is another way of putting it.
It depends on the deal and the rhetoric surrounding it. If it looks like a foreign invasion, by the way, forget it. Simon Bolivar is alive and well in Venezuela, and I can tell you this. I think Bolivar, by the way, was a little bit of a nutcase. But that's been my view of Bolivar for studying him for some time. But if you go to a dinner party with the multimillionaires or billionaires in Caracas, which Mrs. Hanke and I often did, and you get into Simon Bolivar, they will literally, in one case, one big banker, we had dinner, and Mrs. Hanke got into a little bit of a discussion, shall we say.
You had to pull her off the guy, right?
I'm being polite, but and the French were very connected with all of this, and she, being French, is knowledgeable and interested in it. So the next day, he picked Mrs. Hanke up at the hotel. He didn't go to the bank. He picked her up, and they went to the museum, the Simon Bolivar Museum, and he gave her a briefing on Bolivar. So that's That's at the top end, and the bottom end, of course, you can imagine. So you have to be sensitive to all of these things. That's what I'm saying. It depends on how you do the thing. If you come in and the current regime is in power and they're saying what they were saying yesterday, they'll say, we're not going to have the gringos coming in and ripping us off. So that's one way. The other way is a light touch. We're doing business with you, and it's good for us. It's good for you. Everybody's happy. The depletion rate goes up from 0.1% to 8%, and all those reserves in Venezuela actually have a positive value, not a zero value.
And the military standpoint, because that's a big factor in all this too, right? Where the military stands.
Oh, it's clear that the Trump administration, the U.S. is obviously dealing with the military. Why do you think they got Maduro out of there without a shot being fired? They cut a deal with the military. There's no question about it. So the military is a key factor, by the way. And I think one reason that Machado, the Nobel laureate in Peace Prize this year, I think one reason she was cut out of the thing and Trump dumped her is because that was part of the deal with the military. She's adamant against the military. And the military, as long as they're around, there's no way she's going to be in power under any condition. So my conjecture, without any facts, by the way, but just connecting all the dots, is that the U.S. did a deal with the military. They got Maduro out, and in the meantime, Machado was dropped, and that was part of the deal. The deal is you don't shoot at the American military coming in because we're going to take Maduro, and they said, fine, that's part of the deal. And you're going to allow the existing remnant of the regime to stay in power and not back the opposition's leading candidate, Machado. That's part of the deal.
What kind of dollars would you say something like this would cost? What's the cost of doing business, Steve?
I have no idea.
Well, you have to subtract the dollars from the dollars of having the fleet out there no matter what anyways. So it has to be the net increase in costs, and the fleet's roaming around the high seas all the time.
Yeah. So I thought you meant the cost of paying off the
That's what I did. That's what I meant. That's what I meant. What's it cost to buy these people off?
I don't know that. We do know the cost of operating the fleet. Now, as Dave said, you'd have to figure the incremental cost of having it in the Caribbean. That might not be as great. Obviously, it isn't as great as the total cost of running the fleet because you're just putting it in a different location.
Right.
That would be the case otherwise.
So was the whole shooting cigar boats out of the water just a total ruse in the sense that it was not about drugs and drug running and stuff, but rather about we're going to start using live ammo now?
That was a ruse to justify the fact that it was not a regime change.
Right.
The narrative is this isn't a regime change. This is a criminal activity that was taking place, and we got the criminal.
Right.
It was a police operation. Now, the interesting thing, Dave, if you look at what the markets think, if you look at the sovereign bonds, those were trading at 22 cents on the dollar in October, and today they've shot up to 40 cents.
Right. So someone thinks this is going to be an improvement.
Right. And also the PDVSA, the oil company, the state-owned oil company, in October, the bonds were trading at 20 cents. Now they're trading at 32. So
Could that be just a classic short squeeze, though? Could that?
no, I think it's the anticipation of a renegotiation of this defaulted debt, and that they're going to get paid something.
Okay. Do you have any? Do you have any large cap oil companies in your portfolio? Which ones do you like?
No,
You don't?
no, no. I'm a bear on oil, and I don't like to trade. I'm a commodity trader, and the rule is you don't go with a derivative of the commodity. You trade.
David Einhorn just said that somewhere in the last year, where he said invest direct. If you like oil, buy oil. If you don't. But don't buy the company.
Einhorn must have been listening to me.
It could be, actually. He reads a lot of stuff from wackos, and so you and I would be right up there.
Well, I know he's a good friend of yours, so he must be a wacko too.
There's no question. He also said he totally signed off on the great risk of private equity going forward. And he thinks the passive flow argument, which I tried to make, if it reverses, we're in trouble. And thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah. The passive flow risk of reversing is zero. He seemed to not buy that model.
Yeah, but on oil, coming back to that, okay, nothing in the majors, but I remain very bearish on oil, because if you look, no matter what the forecast for incremental demand increases looks like, and it's positive, it isn't zero, all of that can be easily filled by non-OPEC plus producers. And OPEC plus has a lot of excess capacity. So there's just huge ability to accommodate any measure for incremental demand increase. That's a no-brainer by non-OPEC plus producers, and we also have huge excess capacity in OPEC plus. So I'm a bear.
So the Hubbard's Peak Matt Simmons story, you don't think is an issue in our lifetime, then?
No.
Okay.
Or at our age, that's
yeah, it could be tomorrow, right?
That's a short period of time.
It's the green banana argument of Claude, what's his name? Claude Pepper, I think was his name, where he said, Sonny, I don't buy green bananas anymore. So, there might be an oil play, but it's not going to be oil itself, in your opinion, then?
No. Well, and by the way, let's go through the scenario. Let's say they open up and they start producing 3 million.
Right.
They're not going to be able to turn a switch on and increase production very much in Venezuela. That's another part of running Venezuela. That story, it's going to take a long time to get capacity up and things running properly and maintained properly and so forth. But I haven't looked today, but I wonder what Chevron stock. Chevron is the operator in Venezuela, the U.S. So what do you have a screen?
I have it.
What's happened to Chevron today? It's probably up.
Where the hell? Oh,
wait a minute. And how much? While you're looking at that, Dave, how much money would it cost to get this infrastructure up, Steve? Time and money.
Chevron's up 5%, but so is my portfolio. So I'm not sure what that means.
It means you must be invested in Chevron. That's
a lot of metals.
Yeah. So yeah, the metals are up big time.
Yeah. Chevron took a huge spike. It overnight it drifted up, and then it appears to be the U.S. What's the day today?
5th.
Today's the 5th.
Yeah, it's over the weekend. It spiked up by quite a few.
Yeah, well, of course, the CEO of Chevron is the operator. It happens. although I'm not invested in, I like Chevron simply because I like the CEO Worth received his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Colorado, Dave.
So we won't hold that against him then.
No, he's a buff like I am.
I know. My brother got a degree from Colorado too. My brother got a degree from Colorado.
Nothing like Boulder. You just it gets in your skin.
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time. I want to ask you guys one more thing. What happens in Cuba now?
That's what I was going to ask too. There's a double win right there.
Well, this is a case in which I agree with the Secretary of State. I think they're in a lot of trouble.
Cuba?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure the "they" was clarified.
Yeah, it's Cuba.
I don't know why we didn't square up with Cuba 30 years ago. That's left me mystified.
This has been a perfect case of number one. I am an Austrian economist, and I'm a free trader, and I'm adamantly against any kind of protectionist measures, including sanctions. Sanctions are just a form of interventionism and protectionism. The only reason the Castroites hey, you got a real pal there.
I have 5 of them.
At any rate, so the reason that Castro stayed and Cuba is what it is because of sanctions. That's a rally around the flag.
Right, but why didn't we just say, look, let's bring. The other thing is Trump talked about Greenland. There's discussions of Saskatchewan. Is this all Monroe Doctrine stuff, or is there something about Greenland beyond that?
No. Remember, I told you we had Monroe in 1823. Then in 1904, we had the Roosevelt corollary. Right. Now what you're witnessing is a Trump corollary, which means we own everything.
Right. But for example, when he goes after Greenland, verbally at least.
He did that this weekend, by the way.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was old news.
Come back. It's come back on steroids. He's talking about Venezuela, and we're running Venezuela, and then he went off script and said, "Oh, by the way, another thing we need for national security is Greenland." And of course, as Samuel Johnson once said, the national security argument is a refuge for all kinds of scoundrels.
Well, so when Seward bought Alaska for 2 cents an acre, he used the national security argument.
Yeah, that's one of your favorite cards. You love to play that, Dave.
I know. I do love to play that one. Part of the reason is he's right up the lake. His house is right up the lake from me, so it's kind of a local boy.
He is a local boy, but let's face it, it was a good buy.
It was a great buy, and it was also national security. He was prophetic. He was.
Now, this wasn't national security, but the Louisiana Purchase with Jefferson was the president, and Jefferson was always in war with Alexander Hamilton over executive power. And Jefferson, of course, he wanted states' rights, weak president and so forth. But when the opportunity to buy the Louisiana Purchase came around, executive power was imposed by Jefferson.
I've heard rumor he kind of changed some of his tunes when he got to be president. That his high ideals got tapped down once he got the power.
Yeah, that's true. As well as his concubine. We don't need to get into that.
Yeah.
Can we go back to Cuba here for a second, Steve? I know I'm running out of time, but will they turn into a North Korea and lock down, and people will starve to death? Will the regime be toppled, or how do you see it playing out today?
You're asking all these questions where my crystal ball remains in the closet today.
Yours is more accurate than mine, though.
Let's face it. How the hell would I know? What
do you think, though?
I I think as far as Secretary Rubio thinks, I think they were in trouble, and they're going to be in more trouble. That's what I think. I mean, they're in deep trouble. Exactly how they play it and how it evolves, I don't know. But as an economist, and just doing the arithmetic doesn't look very good.
Here's a loaded question for you. I'm going to load it. So there's several parts you can bite on. Are you pleasantly surprised by Rubio's performance?
No.
Okay. And is it because you're not surprised or you're not pleasant?
No, I am not an interventionist. I'm not a regime changer, and he's a hardcore neoconservative that probably was one of the main ones whispering in Trump's ear.
Okay, that's the problem.
We have Trump. His advertisement is that he's a president of peace. Well, he's clearly a president of war. I mean, he's got the military running all over the place. I mean,
I don't see Tulsi Gabbard at the podium lately.
No, you see Radcliffe. Why do you see Radcliffe? You see Radcliffe because this was a CIA operation, and you see Radcliffe because who's running the drones in Ukraine? The CIA runs all of those. The targeting of them.
Yeah, there's not a Ukrainian out there who would know how to run those drones.
No. This is a great bunch of propaganda. The CIA is deeply involved in the Ukraine, and their main venue is the drones.
I read Doug Valentine's book. Can't remember the title, but you can find it. And he had pretty good access to CIA guys, and the entire Vietnam War was run in a way that's very different than presented. So there's a big portion of the Vietnam War that was a bunch of CIA ops where they would go in the middle of the night and just wreak havoc and then get the hell out. And a lot more of that war was fought that way than people realize.
Absolutely, and as far as if you look at the Defense Department, it appears to be nominally kind of buttoned down on Ukraine and kind of sidelined. So that's Trump's public persona. What Trump doesn't tell us is what the CIA is doing, and the CIA is heavily involved in the thing.
Well, I don't know. I can't remember where you stand, but I've been following Putin for a dozen years, which for a chemist is a long time, and I totally blame the neocons for the Ukraine war. I find it, I think if Trump was president, there might not have been a Ukraine war. He would have said, sure, no problem. I also think that Trump and Putin could sign a deal today, but Europe's in the way. Is that right?
Yeah. The problem is the Ukraine has lost the war. The war is lost.
Right.
But
right.
The big issue is who's going to take the blame in the Western alliance for the loss, and that's why the Europeans keep dragging this thing on, because if it stops and there's an agreement, the agreement will obviously favor the winner on the battlefield, which will be Russia, and the Europeans are going to have to eat crow.
But the Ukraine was never going to be won, was it? I mean, there's no chance that Putin was going to lose that war.
That's true. But you've been thinking, you've been engaged in critical thinking and reading other things in the Western propaganda, Dave.
It is true. I do try to find the people who I sense are not lying, and then read what they say.
Well, this reminds me, remember Pat Moynihan, great senator and man about town in Washington, D.C. Everyone can have their own opinions, but they can't have their own facts. Mm-hmm. So you and I agree with Moynihan.
Mm-hmm. I kind of miss the days where guys like that would get together in a smoky back room and solve problems.
Oh, Moynihan, I had a great admiration for Moynihan, and I had an opportunity to meet Moynihan on various occasions because I was a chief economic advisor to the Joint Economic Committee, and occasionally I'd go to the Senate dining room with Senator Sims, U.S. Senator from Idaho at the time, he was on the Joint Economic Committee, and if Pat was in there, he'd usually be eating alone, and we'd join him, and so the conversation was pretty interesting.
No doubt.
He's a very colorful guy. The other thing, you did mention Putin, and I actually did meet Putin once in May of 1992. I was the mayor of St. Petersburg was Sobchak, and Sobchak was a very liberal reformer. Wanted to get my views on things. Invited Mrs. Hanke and I to St. Petersburg, so we went, and at that point, Putin was an assistant of Sobchak, and after our formal meetings with Sobchak during the day, there was a reception in the evening. I mean, right, end of day kind of reception. It wasn't in the evening. A lot of people, and Mrs. Hanke doesn't go for those big receptions too. We usually make the appearance and exit pretty fast. But she said, "Let's talk to that guy. He really looks like, she said he really looks interesting, and he looks very Russian." And it was Putin.
That's interesting. So my take on Putin is that that loyalty is everything. So in some sense, he understands Trump in that way. But loyalty is everything, both with respect to people being loyal to him, but him being loyal to who he worked for as he rose. So as he rose through the ranks, like he got into the political end of it, my understanding is the KGB said, "Well, you're still working with us?" And he said, "No." He said, "I am now working with these guys." He would not have two bosses. And the other thing is there's claims that he's one of the richest guys in the world. I don't think anyone has been able to document that. I think he lives in a nice palace, of course. But the question is there $200 billion floating around in some Panamanian bank? And I don't think they've been able to trace that. I think that's just an assertion.
Well, again, we're talking about facts, and you're suggesting you can't find the facts.
I am suggesting you can't. But he when he was high up, not yet prime minister or whatever the hell it is, his wife got sick, and he had to borrow money to pay for her surgery. And so that's not a guy who's skimming, right? I read this book on him. I try not to get my facts from books because too directly because they're already pre-digested for me, and I don't like that. So I'd rather go one layer deeper. And the book was funny because it talked very flatteringly about Putin right up until he became prime minister, and it's almost like another author took over. And all of a sudden, it was just nothing but bad things about Putin once he became. In the book, it was his biography. But right up to the moment he became prime minister, it was a flattering biography. And then it became this totally unflattering biography.
Well, I think what you have to realize is that Britain is at the epicenter of what's called Russophobia.
Mm-hmm.
That's where
city of London, yeah.
It started with the Crimea War, and so that colors a lot of what is going on right now. By the way, it's old-fashioned Russophobia.
Right. It's the guys who don't realize that the Cold War ended.
Right. And the Brits never have. I mean, they've been on this. We're talking about the Crimea War. That was a while ago. I'm not talking about the current one.
Right. The old one. The other thing that I have a real problem with is I have a problem with justifying us causing many loss of lives in a region of the world that's not our business. I mean, it really bothers me.
I have big problems with this.
Hey, get out of here.
So the point that I want to raise is that one of my professors was Ken Boulding, and famous economist, many honors, president of the American Economics Association, and so forth and so on and so on. And he was the main person who started peace research. It happened he's a Quaker, but he's the main guy, and he was my professor. So that's where I'm coming from. And you gave me the lead in talking about it. Now, Boulding concluded the following: that you would have a stable peace every place in the world if you could have agreement by everyone on boundaries, and essentially property rights, sovereignty, and the agreement that no foreign sovereign would meddle in any internal affairs of another sovereign.
There's a pipe dream. Holy moly.
I know, but it's a very good condition, because you look at everything going on. What about Ukraine? You've got lots of meddling that was going on, and you've got fundamentally a fluid border, a border dispute.
Right. It's not our business.
Yeah, and what do you have in the Middle East? Same thing.
Well, the Middle East, you can give great credit to Great Britain for screwing those borders up royally.
Of course. That's the source of the whole thing.
Right. A lot of people don't understand, like, for example, the Azov Battalion, they don't realize that they were anti-Russian, anti-Soviet World War II troops that never sort of disbanded completely. And so Stepan Bandera and these guys were very much anti-Soviet. So our CIA armed the hell out of those guys to give Russia guff, and that was our meddling.
Bandera was totally a CIA guy.
Right. And yeah.
So you know, and look who's the president of Syria.
I don't even know now.
He's a CIA guy.
Well, so I've never been able to understand why we were so bugged by Assad. Come on, stop it. Assad, what problem was he giving us? He's a strong arm guy. So what? That's the Middle East.
Yeah, he was giving Syrians a lot of trouble.
Well, but again, it's not our business.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you remember the Skripal poisoning story that they tried to blow up and turn in? I got into the middle of that. I ended up doing George Galloway, and I had Al Jazeera ringing the phone up. Stop it! And because I call bullshit on the whole story, because the chemistry was wrong. They said, "Oh, this is Russian technology." I go, "My sophomores could make this crap."
Yeah.
And the story was just completely fabricated. Once you looked into the details and the timelines and stuff, you go, "This is just a total psyop." And then finally, the Porton Down guys came out and said, "It's not actually uniquely Russian technology," and so that story went away.
So we're getting back to Moynihan and the facts again.
I know.
And we're getting into Hanke's 95% rule. 95% of what you read in the press is either wrong or irrelevant.
So what I couldn't remember last time, it's Sturgeon's law that says 90%, but it's the same idea. Last time I couldn't remember the name, and then I realized it was Sturgeon's law. You and Sturgeon agree.
Where I got that, the first thing, I snatched it, actually. The first time I actually heard this was in the late 60s. Armand Alchin, a famous economist, professor at UCLA, and Alchin would start every class, every term with that line, the 95% either wrong or irrelevant. But he was only talking about peer-reviewed journals.
So you mentioned peer review. I think we can probably agree on this too. Peer review is often used to justify something or to say when it's not peer reviewed that it therefore is not valid. I was an editor of a journal for 20 years, and peer review means nothing.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you.
It means some guy handed it to his grad student.
Right, and the fact checkers that fact check non-peer reviewed things are even worse.
Right.
Because they have no idea what they're doing.
Right. So the bottom line is, are the arguments good or not? That's it. That's the whole enchilada.
Well, there are two things. Are the facts the facts?
Yeah, is the data good? Is the data good?
Yeah. Are the data good? And is the argument good? Now, in the argument about regime change, remember that von Mises was making the argument a priori.
Right.
He wasn't basing it on any facts. It was the logic of the thing.
Right.
And his conclusion was that the regime changes were not going to work. And what I just held up a while ago contains a boatload of facts that support that argument.
There's my counter.
Hey, that's good. I like. Is that one of your dogs on the cover?
No, but it turns out that I got it for Christmas. Someone gave it to me.
Say what that book is, Dave, for people listening on the audio.
It's pretty good science jokes by Steve Marcus. Pretty good science jokes. I'm always looking for pretty good jokes. So, okay, Mike, anything?
Well, I think we said an hour. We went a little bit over, so some bonus time for people.
Since you're negligent with these things, Mike, Steve Hanke is a professor of applied economics at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Dave Collum is what's your chair name? I can't remember.
Betty R. Miller, professor of chemistry.
A chaired professor of chemistry at Cornell University.
With peer-reviewed journals. With peer-reviewed articles.
Yeah. With you being the peer.
With me being the peer, yeah, exactly. Me being the peer. Yeah, I got into it with a famous historian, Victor Davis Hanson, and he was wrong on all three counts. I took him right down to the studs, in my opinion. But I referred to myself as a former chemist speaking to a former historian. Because he was being a former historian. He was not being historically sound.
By the way, did you get that out of one of your joke books?
No, I did not. That one I invented from whole cloth. I just decided there's no way this guy's acting as a historian making these stupid arguments. And so I was willing to hang former chemist on me because I wrapped up my group a year ago. And I said, okay, former chemist, former historian. He pissed me off. I got pretty mad at him. So it was with civility that I took him down to the studs, but his three arguments were terrible.
What did his neoconservative corpuscles come out?
I like Victor, and I've stated it in public, but in this particular case, and some other guy wrote a blog, said the same three. He tore them to shreds for disingenuous arguments. He and Mark Levin and Ted Cruz attacked me, and Mark and Ted I can just laugh off as being clown heads, but Victor I had to factually go through his arguments and say, here is where Victor is wrong. On historical treatments, on the history of World War II, which he's written books, I had to take him down. So he was being political is what he was being.
Yeah, okay. So it's been great to be with both of you on this glorious 5th of January. It isn't so glorious in Baltimore. It's very overcast.
Let me show you a view. This is why you got to visit me. Mike, I'm not sure. You've probably seen this, but if you come to Ithaca, I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, yeah, I can see the lake.
Yeah, and we'll sit out on the deck and cook steaks and talk more.
Yeah, We're coming. As soon,
Yeah, but-
as, soon
yeah,
as soon as spring arrives, Dave.
that's right. Bring Mrs. Hanke because
It-
she's the brains of the operation, is my
I-
understanding.
I'm surprised that there doesn't look like there's ice on the lake.
It hasn't been that cold. Must be the global warming hoax this year.
That's what I used to like in Iowa when I was growing up. The ice would get thick, and you could drive a car on the ice.
You know what they used to do here? Supposedly, they wanted to get rid of something. They would drag it out on the ice with a sled and just leave it there,
Yeah.
and the ice would melt. It would drop to the bottom of the lake.
Guys, thank you so much for doing this. For people that are listening, I put all these conversations up early on my Substack, so encourage people to become paid subscribers. And then for those that watch on YouTube, Rumble, I read all the comments. Please comment, like, share, and I thank you guys both for making time for me today.
Thank you for inviting us, Mike.
Mic drop.
Thank you. Happy New Year to both of you.
Same to you both. Mic drop.